Okay, and we are live. And this is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore. Just kicking off the event here. We have today's guest is Jeff Lindsay, who has a brand new book out called Fool Me Twice. And we just happen to have a nice little stash of signed copies here, although they are dwindling fast.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't even have one. That's
you don't have one yet?
mm-mm.
Uh, well,
I was
I'm going
gonna
to be
keep one of yours, but my wife said I couldn't.
For everybody watching on Facebook, I'm going to be largely in the background here, monitoring your questions and comments as they come in. And I don't know, maybe 30, 35 minutes in, I'll pop up and ask Jeff any questions you might have. But now I'm going to turn it over to Barbara Peters, who's standing by at home.
I am. Thank you very much, Patrick. I am holding my own copy of Fool Me Twice, an autographed copy. And I have chosen a museum background. My office is so horrible that I have to use a green screen or I would have to like knock down the walls and redo it at the moment. And this one reminds me a bit of the Hermitage where Fool Me Twice kicks off in St. Petersburg, Russia. And then at some point we actually wander around the Vatican or circle around the Vatican as the case may be. So hence my background. So Jeff, first of all, how are you?
Well, hanging on as much as anybody, I guess. I find it really hard to concentrate and work right now, which is a pain in the butt. But I mean, I'm all healthy. My family's all good. So far, we're surviving it.
Oh, I'm delighted to hear that. Let me wish you a happy new year to kick us off.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you. And we have the pleasure of welcoming you and Riley Wolf in December of 2019 with his first adventure. And it made me, wonder, what is it about the heist novel that attracted you after writing Dexter for so long?
Honestly, it didn't really. I got fascinated by the character. Um, I think my work is usually character driven, and I had this idea of this character that eventually morphed into Riley Wolf. Eventually, at first he was just a con man, but eventually he sort of began to evolve, and I wanted to make it more interesting and exciting. And all of a sudden, there he was, the world's greatest thief. So it wasn't anything I planned, it just evolved into that.
Well, I agree that your work is character driven. And I myself find that heist novels make a welcome break in a panoply of darker crime novels. And it's kind of fun to root for the opposite side every now and then. What is it? The guy at the wrong end of the gun is a kind of a genre. I don't know if you have watched a new series on Netflix. The French are making like the best crime television ever called Lupin, which is basically based on Arsène Lupin, the 19th century, thief and investigator and so forth. And watching it made me think about Peter Ustinov and Topkapi, or who was it? Peter O'Toole and Audrey Hepburn in How to Steal a Million. I don't really think that Sting, although it's a great caper, is a
Yeah,
heist movie in the same
I
sense.
remember Top Copy very fondly because I really like Peter Ustinov. I haven't seen the others. I haven't read a lot of heist books, so-called, or seen a lot of movies on it. Not even in Ocean's 11. Um, it's just, it's something I fell into. Like with Dexter, immediately people are going, "Why are you attracted to the serial killer genre?" And I'm like, "Well, it's a genre, seriously? I had no idea." And with heist novel, I didn't think of it that way. I guess because again, it's about the character to me, and the heist is just the setting. I didn't think of it as a heist novel. I thought of it as exploring this guy Riley Wolf.
Well, you certainly do that. I mean, one of the interesting features I found upon rereading it this afternoon before we talked is his devotion to his mother and how she, I don't want to give anything away, but the way that his mother plays mostly in the background, and can actually be kind of a hook to reel him in if necessary. But you know, the truth is, to write a heist novel, you have to dream up the heist. So while the story is character driven, it actually won't work if you come up with a great idea and then you can't bring it off.
Yeah,
So
that's true. And it's a lot more work than I'm used to, of a different kind, because there's just plotting for days. Every little plot turn has to be figured out. Uh, and that's a real, it's a real difference from the way I've worked in the past. And I'm still getting used to it, honestly. It's, I'm not, it's not my strong point, plotting things out. It's harder for me than I feel like it should be. I mean, everything should be easy and it's not. Oh. But it's a different thing. It's a change, and it's new, and that part is good. But the part that isn't good is that the new thing is a lot more work than I'm used to.
well, it is. You know, the first crime, we can certainly talk about the introductory crime because it's like the first chapter, is we have Riley. He's in the Hermitage, which is in the museum that is housed in the palace of Catherine the Great along the River Neva in St. Petersburg. And some years ago, my husband and I actually took a week with the Friends of the Hermitage and spent it in St. Petersburg. And we had a choice of months. And since we had been in St. Petersburg in July, when we were nearly trampled to death by other tourists, I said to my husband, you know, if we're going to go back to St. Petersburg, we're going to go in December. I mean, we're going to do like the real St. Petersburg. And fortunately, that was one of the choices. So we did indeed. We arrived in a blizzard, discovered that the Russians had navigated snow really well when they had horses and sleds and had absolutely no idea how to drive on it. And I'm from Chicago and Rob's from New York. So we actually did know how to drive on it, but we couldn't do it. And we spent a whole week inside the museum.
You really
And
need that Russian Naval Academy male chorus in the background for the whole trip, or it's just not the same.
right. Well, in fact, we went to
Coming.
visit, you know, the Russian, one of the things they gave us was a concert there and all the rest of it. But the museum, because it's in this old palace, you know, it is not necessarily well secured. In fact, there's a huge amount of discussion has been in museumology about whether the Hermitage is really the right place for some of this great art, because they don't really have up-to-date heating and cooling systems. In fact, when you're there, when I was there in July for a shorter tour, they just open the windows. So, you know, the dust and everything's blowing across the Da Vinci and you're going, oh my God, you know, can this really be good?
Yeah, there's a certain amount of kerfuffle about some of those art treasures too. Especially from France, who wants some of that work back again. They have some pretty good impressionists and things like that. And I'm not at all sure how the connection works, but France feels like some of it should be coming back.
Well, the Nazis took a huge heist, and then the Russians, when they got to Berlin first, went off with quite a lot of the art. When I've been in Berlin museums, I'm a museum junkie. I mean, a serious museumologist, so I've been to a lot. I was horrified to discover that Heinrich Schliemann's wonderful treasure trove from Troy now resides somewhere in Russia, because among all the other things they swiped, they went off with that. But the French claim that a lot of their impressionist paintings.
Yeah, the stuff that was stolen by the Nazis was
And then
liberated by the Russians.
right, who kept it in vaults in the basement. But when I'm trying to think how long ago it was we did this, several years ago, they had actually brought some of it up and were displaying it, some Picassos and other stuff on their walls. And to be honest, I didn't think it was first-rate impressionist work compared to other museums that I've been to, but there it is. But that whole collection was not really, it was sort of bought, if I remember right, by Catherine the Great. She wasn't a passionate collector, you know, it was more like books by the yard or, you know, that kind of thing. So it's a jumbled collection and it resides in different rooms in the palace. But I could see how you could do your heist to poor Riley of the Romanov, or sorry, the Rothschild Fabergé egg,
Right.
because of all these things that the security was kind of weak, and if the thing is riverside, so indeed you could, leap onto a boat after exiting the museum. And, so that part was okay. But the second crime, the one that we can talk about some, that's really an impossible crime. I
Well,
mean,
yeah,
you
that's
set
the whole
yourself
point.
up to do an impossible crime, like an impossible locked room mystery.
Well, that's what Riley Wolf does. He has to really get excited about something. He has to have people telling him it can't be done. That's, the first book, Just Watch Me, goes into why that is in his background. And I worked with a psychologist on setting up that kind of motivating factor. But the fact is that he's got to have that challenge. He's made enough money doing what he does, which is thieving, that he doesn't really need the money. He's not in it for the money, but he's got to have someone saying it's impossible. And this time, this is the only time ever that I'm aware of that he's ever actually agreed. Yeah, it's impossible. It can't be done. But he has to do it this time, or he's dead, and his cohort Monique is dead. And that's really like too soon to end the series, in my opinion.
Well, I certainly agree with you there. The actual impossible part is not so much for Riley, but for you. So, you're going to have to figure out how he can do it. And, I mean, it again comes up early. What he's pressured to do is to steal a Raphael, but it's a fresco.
It's a fresco,
And
and the fresco is it's painted into the wet plaster as they're making the wall, and as the plaster dries, the paint is in it and it sets. So the fresco is actually part of the wall. You have to steal the wall to steal a fresco.
right, and it's inside the Vatican, which, unlike the Hermitage, really has decent
Has
security.
very good security. Yeah.
So what will one do? Some years ago, when I was in Milan on an opera tour, they took us to see The Last Supper. And the fact that it's a fresco was terrifying when the Nazis occupied Italy, because there was this terrible fear, they would destroy the wall that is painted on, but preserving it is virtually impossible to keep it in any kind of great
Did you
shape.
see it before the restoration or after?
After.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, but even so, you can see the ongoing challenge. And, I'm not any expert on fresco painting, but as you say, you have to slap the paint on the wall while everything's wet, and then it dries, and then it's part of the wall, and there you are. So I didn't think we should do any giveaways about how Riley pursues this quest, but um, who is the guy that puts him under all this pressure?
Well, the first one is the most badass arms dealer in the world, a guy named Patrick Boniface, who is a very serious art collector. And he's trying to prove that he has a soul, that he's not just a brutal sort of kill everyone sociopath, because he kind of is that too. But he has a very particular attachment to this fresco, and he must have it. And he knows it's impossible, but he also knows that's what Riley Wolf does. So he basically kidnaps Riley Wolf and says, I want this, you're going to get it for me, or else. But this is complicated because when Riley Wolf is released by Boniface, he's grabbed by another arms dealer who says, yeah, go ahead and do it and let me know when you're done, or I'll kill you too, because he wants to use Riley Wolf delivering the fresco to sneak himself and his men in to kill Boniface and take over the #1 spot. So it's like a double bind, and it doesn't even take into account the fact that, as usual, the police are sniffing on Riley Wolf's tail and getting even closer. So it's a very complicated knot that he's got to resolve in this one, um,
Tell
which
us a
was
little
just
bit
so much
about,
fun for me.
I'm sorry. Tell us a little bit about the FBI agent, because, I guess in a good series, there should always be a central, an antagonist, a particular antagonist to your
Yes,
protagonist.
the FBI agent is a very, very good, very successful guy named Special Agent Frank Delgado. Um, he's based on a couple of Cuban friends of mine in high school. Um, and he's relentless, and he's sort of become obsessed because he's tried several times to nail Riley, and each time Riley gets away. So it's become a thing with him. He doesn't fail either. He's got a tremendous record of catching the people he goes after, and only Riley has got away from him, not once but several times. So he is moving in and doing anything he can to get closer. At the same time, the two arms dealers are watching, and the Vatican security is on him, and it just, like I say, it's gonna be a real job of work, a tough row to hoe.
So now that you've got the FBI agent, basically on top of everything else, you have a kind of continuing cat and mouse game between Riley and this dedicated agent who wants to take him down. So pressing forward, you have, it's going to be hard to top this one. Have have
That
you
has
really,
occurred to me.
yes, thought about that after this impossible crime, what can be possible next?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I don't know if the next one I'm working on is harder, but you, you do what you can. The problem with topping each book with the preceding one is that eventually you come to a point where you say, okay, I've just topped the most impossible thing ever. How do I top that? And I don't know. I don't think I'm there yet, but when I get there, I may just decide to retire.
But you've raised an interesting point, and I wanted to ask you about this because I often think about it in regard to humorous mystery. And while we could say that Dexter, being a vigilante serial killer, it's got a really dark side. At the same time, they are indeed humorous. But I've always thought that the problem with humorous mystery is that you wind up having to raise it, keep it funny, and at some point, does it turn into something like a caricature of itself, or does it just run stale? I'm not saying Dexter did either one. It's just a philosophical question that I apply to humorous mystery series.
I don't know. I haven't found it to be the case. As far as funny goes, people who are funny, I mean, they experience tragedy too, but they have a funny take on it. Uh, and what I found, I'm not deliberately setting out, and I don't have a joke book or anything. It's just that it, I, it's been my experience that if you do funny at all, it's really hard to turn it off. So whatever you're doing is going to have a certain amount of that in it. And I don't think it so far has ever undercut the seriousness or the tension or anything like that in any of my books. I think it's more of an addition than a subtraction.
Oh, I agree with you. And I didn't mean it that way. All I meant was that if you're writing something and you don't want it to just be the same every time, then you have to think up ways to, well, the thing we were just talking about with Riley. And I have read some humorous mystery series where I find that they escalate in order to keep making them. I think that's true of TV too. When you started out, I love Laugh-In, for example, dating myself when it started out, but then eventually it kind of turned into a caricature of itself. And,
Yeah,
it's hard to be original and funny consistently.
it is. It's a phenomenon that, at least in TV, is called jumping the shark. Um, I work hard not to do that, to stay fresh and interesting and not not go overboard. I know I've noticed in several writers that I like otherwise that you can almost see where the deadline kicks in and they go, oh crap, I've got 200 pages to go and it's due next week. And it's almost an outline or something ridiculous happens because they didn't have time to think of a good way to end it. And I missed a deadline now and then, but I've avoided that so far, I think.
I remember years ago, it was a British humorist mystery writer whom I loved, and I won't mention his name, but he wrote one book that they were off on the high seas, various things happened, and then all of a sudden, this absolutely absurd solution came roaring in with no underpinning and whatever. And I knew him well. I wrote to him and I said, "What the hell was that?" And he said exactly that. He said, I was on deadline and I couldn't figure it out. So I just brought in like the IRA or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and I thought, okay, I mean, I understand that, but it was really disappointing.
It is. I go by a very wise editor friend of mine once said, not my editors, just someone I knew. Um, he said, I was faced with a problem like this, and he said, if they really want the book, they'll take it even if it's late.
Right.
And if they don't want it, they're probably looking for an excuse. And if it isn't this, it'll be something else. So just go ahead and do it right, and everybody will be happy. And I
Well,
found that to be true, I think.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. My mantra as an editor for 20 years was better a late book than a bad book. I mean, the world does not end if a book does not publish on its appointed date, even if it's inconvenient. But the risks of a bad book overall, in terms of the author's career, reader reaction, publisher
Yeah,
revenue,
that's more
is
important.
much greater than changing the schedule and publishing it late. It's been interesting, Jeff, with COVID, that publishers have been a lot freer about rescheduling things. I mean, I just get a calendar worked out because we have a really intricate calendar. And then all of a sudden I'll get an email saying, oh, we just moved so-and-so from this date to that date. And, there's a whole domino thing that then this
Yeah.
creates for
Well,
me, but I'm finding it's happening fairly frequently. And I wonder if that'll be a long-term consequence maybe of the
probably
current
not.
publishing model, will
I
be
found
that.
that with this book, Fool Me Twice, every now and because it was late, and a couple of times they tried to give me the impression that a team of 50 or 60 incredibly bright, wonderful, talented people were standing like this waiting for the manuscript. Come on, what do we do? It's not here yet. Oh my God. And now on the third book, I'm not getting that at all. It's just like, how you doing? Okay, good. See ya. So I'm enjoying it. On the other hand, I'm one of those people that always works better if someone is standing over me going, hurry, hurry, it's got to be done. Hurry. Early in my career, especially with playwriting, I could not finish a play unless the director was saying, Jesus, we open in 3 weeks. I need the last 4 scenes. So that's always a spur. And I'm not getting it right now. So probably this one will take me 4 or 5 years to write, I think.
Well, that's one of the advantages perhaps of becoming a senior, if I may say, is that life is more relaxed.
I'm not there yet. I've never really gotten the hang of relaxing. But I'm hoping someday, my daughter's trying to teach me, but I'm not there yet.
So speaking of Dexter, have you ever thought about revisiting Dexter, or have you put him quietly to bed?
Um, I left a very slight opening in the final book. And, if the circumstances were right, okay, which obviously means money, I wouldn't mind revisiting it, but I'm not obsessed with it in any way. I just, it's over. until someone wants to make it not over enough to get me interested.
Well, I ask that for fans. I always think it's wise if you have a series character that you're fond of and that fans love, to always leave them somewhere floating around, just
Yeah,
in
well,
case.
honestly, I thought that the series would go on a lot longer, but it just
Hmm.
didn't work out that way. I always wanted to do, like John D. McDonald, write this one series until you die. And if anything else comes up that's an interesting idea, you can do that on the side. But you've got this one series going on and on and on. And I thought that would happen. That's what I wanted with my career, because honestly, I'm lazy. But it didn't work out that way.
Yeah, but John D. McDonald wrote Travis McGee as a guy who basically was brand new every book. I mean, there wasn't any real carryover book to book in his
Right.
personal life. And I think that's harder to write today. I think that people
Yeah.
want more of their characters and they want more, not just the character, the main character, but the ensemble cast people get attached to.
Yeah.
And
I,
so
I,
it's harder just to recycle Travis McGee book after book after book as though he just sprang, like Venus from the sea on a shell and floated to shore.
Yeah, I think it is. I think the world is changing so quickly now, and that virtually everyone is so inundated with media and content that the standards have changed, people's awareness has changed, and the times change so much that if you write a book that doesn't take notice of the latest change in social media now, for example, people are like, oh my God, when was this written? 1942? This is, ugh. So yeah, it's the world is different. Your audience is different. So you kind of have to adapt with it.
It is different, and it's also more interactive author with fans than it once was. I think every author has to recognize that there's
There's a
a.
good side and a bad side to that, by the way.
Oh, definitely so. I mean, it works the same way for us, at the store. We used to have customers who got something in the mail and sent an order with the check, and then eventually they got their books. And that was the whole communication. And now it's just constant, with people amending their orders, checking on their orders, you know. And as we do a lot of really large campaigns, it's difficult to explain to people that if you have, I mean, we have we sell in the thousands, fortunately for us, that there's no way to process those orders and that book in an overnight deal. But the expectation of people colored by Amazon and other major online retailers is they're going to get something instantly.
Right.
And that's a really horrible problem for us. I've taken to taking photos of cartons in our back room and, mail tubs going out the door and everything else and saying, this is how it is, it's the
Yeah.
best we can do. And,
I think you put your finger on an important aspect of this, which is that it's an instant gratification culture too. And I want it right now or I don't want it. So that's a huge expectation that's really hard to meet every time.
it's very hard to meet every time. I agree. And it'll be interesting to see, Jeff, what the long-term effects of this interruption in sort of, I hate this word because it's used all the time now, but these pivots that everybody has had to make. It's one of my least favorite words
Yeah, are
of
you sensitive to that too? Like overused words and phrases that just, because I've been sort of quietly making a list. I don't know, maybe it'll be a coffee table book or something, but things like unprecedented, that's another one. It's like, I don't want to say that anymore. And at the end of the day, this is an unprecedented pivot, which would be like the worst sentence you can say in the English language, I think.
there's a lot of, I don't know what you'd want to call it, book speak for lack of anything else, that I read in various publishing and book selling circulars. And I think, I'm really getting tired of this language. And when I write to our customers, I try to avoid it. When I send out an e-news today, publicizing your event and some other ones we're doing, I talked about, the Constitution and Federalist Paper number 10. and how we all really ought to read them, because there's no point in repeating all of this other commentary that people are making. It's hard to come up with a useful uh, contribution to the conversation. And that's another word that's overused to the point where I just feel like throwing up is conversation.
Yes.
You know,
We need
everything
to
is
have a
now a conversation.
conversation about that. I'm sick to death of it. I don't want to have conversations. I want to have constructive action. And every time you hear that at the end of the day, we need to have a conversation, I want to strangle someone.
And yet here we are having one.
Yeah, well, we
How
better
about
pivot
how
to
about
something
starting a
else.
narrative?
There you
Yeah,
go,
that's
Patrick. Come
another
back
one.
and join us.
Yeah,
Patrick?
starting a narrative. I can't stand that one. Um, Curating, that should be abolished.
Yes,
There's so many good ones.
indeed. I thought you might like to talk to Jeff about the musical instruments behind him for a moment as part of our conversation.
Yeah. Well, there's some other things too. I do have a few questions
Good.
from the audience, and you've had such a great great luck in Hollywood with the Dexter adaptation, and these new books would certainly lend themselves to a TV. Any word on that and the Riley Wolf books for TV or the movies?
Yes, I'm hoping to finalize a deal that's been hanging for a while. And it's just been, over the basically from Thanksgiving until a week or so after New Year's, nothing gets done. So I'm hoping that sometime in the next couple of weeks, the deal will be finalized and we can go. We're not sure yet whether it's a movie or a TV series. I think it depends on who they can get interested in playing it. But I have, I almost said I have every confidence, which is another thing. If I can digress for a moment, I worked for Steve Allen for 4 years. And he told me this story of, um, he starred in a movie called The Benny Goodman Story, and it was his first big movie. And he was very nervous, and he's walking into the premiere, and Groucho Marx stopped him on the way in, and he said, "Steve, don't worry, you're going to be very good in this movie. I have every confidence." Well, not every confidence. It's such a perfect Groucho thing to say that's stuck in my head all these years. And every time I say every confidence, I think of Groucho. Not every confidence.
There was I think it was GM Ford, Barbara. Remember him?
Yes.
I remember him saying a good line, which was, you go into a restaurant and they ask you, "Do you have reservations?" And he said, "Well, yes, I do, but I think I'll eat here anyway."
Yeah.
That was a good one. Um,
He's a very funny guy. I still think Who in Hell is Wanda Fuca is one of the truly great original titles.
yeah,
Remember that? That was his first book, and it was so funny.
absolutely. Well, Jeff, it's funny. I was reading a little bit about your background, and you've had quite the amazing and diverse history in the arts of all different kinds. A musician, actor, playwright. Can you talk a little bit about the plays, and did writing for the theater affect your way of telling a story? Did it have an impact on that?
Well, you were talking about having luck with Hollywood, and I think that's part of it. I started serious writing doing dramatic writing, and people have always told me that when they read my books, they can see it happening. I think that's a big part of it. And I think that's why Hollywood likes the books, because they can see it. They don't have to do too much work to visualize it and convert it. I mean, there's never been a movie, as far as I know, of Ulysses, James Joyce's book. For that reason, he was writing literary stuff. He wasn't writing things that people could see. Uh, I think he probably missed out on a lot of money because of that, and it's a shame. But
I think you did okay.
yeah, I don't, well, because he was very good at getting other people to pay his bills, which is a talent I've always lacked, but I admire it greatly. And yeah, it was a big influence. The plays were, uh, I, they I always had to have a venue and usually a director for it. I couldn't just write a play in a vacuum. So that was one big gear shift when I moved to writing books. It was like, I don't know if anyone's going to buy it at first. I don't know if it's ever going to be published. And that was kind of weird because when I wrote a play before that, I had a date when I would see it. Um, and I like that. It's really hard to write in a vacuum.
And I must have missed the memo on this, Barbara. Did you know that that Jeff's married to Ernest Hemingway's niece?
I did not.
Oh my God. How can you be so woefully ignorant about my personal life?
That's a
You
really good
probably don't even
question.
know my daughter's names. Good God. This interview's over.
Sorry, we didn't do our research.
Yeah, no, I saw that and I was like, wow, I didn't know that. That's what's that been like? I'm sure you've been asked a lot about that. He's such a
Yeah.
towering, complicated figure.
The usual question is, what's it like being married to a Hemingway? Which is I don't know. I've always found that a little insulting. My wife is not a generic person. Like,
Right.
here's your Hemingway. Hang on here. I'll go get your Faulkner. Here you go. Complete collection. She's someone I've known most of my life. Our families were good friends when we were growing up. We'd go sailing and picnics and camping vacations, both families together. And so it was more like marrying the girl next door than it was marrying a Hemingway. Um, it's if I had married her because she was a Hemingway, I don't think it would have lasted 35 years, honestly. We would have got sick of each other after 35 weeks, probably. So I mean, we joke and say it was an arranged marriage and we don't even like each other because it thrilled our parents. It was like a dream come true for them. But for us, kind of the same. It's surprising, but here we are 35 years later and still together. Um, the first 20 years, I guess, everywhere we went, I was Mr. Hemingway.
Yeah.
And I want you to picture in your head what it would be like if everywhere you went, nobody wanted to talk about anything except your wife's dead uncle.
Mm.
It's incredibly annoying. And
Note
then,
to self, I will not bring that up again.
no, you can bring it up. I don't mind talking about it. It's turned now. A
Yeah.
while back, we were checking into a hotel somewhere, and the clerk said, "Here's your key, Mrs. Lindsay." And I was like, and she was beaming. My wife is smiling. And she said, "I've waited so long to hear that."
Finally.
So yeah, it works.
Yeah. Well, Barbara mentioned the music, and you were a singer-songwriter for years and worked in, I understand, in LA club scene. And before we got started, you were making reference to your studio. Um, Tell us a little bit about your musical adventures and career.
Uh, well, that was I took a year off from college, and I'd been doing coffee houses and stuff in college. But the year off, I was playing in a bunch of fern bars and dives and things like that, as a way of making money to pay for when I went back to college. And one night, uh, an agent came in and asked me if I was interested in. He had a plan. He was going to set me up, and for 6 months he would put me in this cabin he had to write and develop material. And he had this whole rap. He would bring all the food, anything I needed, any drugs I wanted, and he'd bring in girls too. Do you like girls? Yes, I do. Okay, I'll bring them in too. Don't worry about that. Just sit and make music. And it sounded great, because I was, I think, 19 years old. uh, so I was really surprised to hear myself say, "Thank you, but I'm going to go back and finish college." And I had no idea I was going to say that because I'd been waiting all my life, I guess, to hear someone say, "Sign here, we're going to make you a star, kid." And when they said it, it was like, I think I'll finish college. But through the rest of college and graduate school and all, I kept playing and doing coffee houses and so on. And when I got to LA, I had a sort of a nouveau punk art rock band called the Fabulous Dorks. And the name of the band was interesting. We were rehearsing in a house in Santa Barbara, and I'd come up with this arrangement for Honky Tonk Women, sort of based on like what Devo would have done if they had had a really bad day and run out of ideas. And so we were just playing over and over again, honk, honk, honky, 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 honk, honk, honky, 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 for Honky Tonk Women. And we've been at it for an hour and a half, 2 hours, when the next door neighbor kicked the door down. And he came in going, stop, stop, just stop. You guys are not a band. You're nothing but a bunch of dorks. And we all unison went, yeah, what a great name. So it was the Fabulous Dorks, which broke up live on stage the night the A&R people from the record companies came to hear us. So I was back to doing coffee houses again. I did a couple of bar bands and stuff in the years in between. And I still, write some songs now and then.
Now, was this was the early 1980s?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A very interesting kind of mix of stuff going on in the LA clubs at that time, right?
Yeah, it was starting to evolve from punk to new wave. And the blend, we were sort of in the middle there. We call it no wave, like no theater, Japanese theater, because we're all theater students. But the blend there was starting to happen, and you get this incredibly polished pop songs that you could tell had started in punk, but kind of evolved into punk pop or new wave, or not quite new wave yet. And it was a really interesting period because there are so many different things going on.
Yeah, you had the X and the Blasters and Los Lobos, or on the same bill.
Yeah, and on the other end of the spectrum, you had like I don't know, the Go-Go's,
Right?
and walk like an Egyptian,
The Bangles.
the Bangles, and really cool stuff. And interestingly enough, I mentioned the Bangles in particular because up until that point, it had been, everybody knew girls couldn't play the guitar. But then, Hart came along with April Lawson, and then the Bangles, and there were a couple of really good, unfortunately still called girl groups, that, yeah, they could play guitar better than I could. They were good. And I thought that was an incredibly interesting wrinkle then as well. Just so many interesting things going on then. The club scene was, looking back on it, that was like one of the most interesting times. Maybe comparable to the 60s when groups like the Doors were breaking in.
Right. Which was only 10 years before, really.
Yeah.
Right?
And since that time, nothing has changed. So a little disappointing.
So a writerly question, did all of your musical background, Jeff, help you develop a distinctive voice as a writer? Do you find that, cadence comes in and word choice and so forth?
I guess so. I mean, I'm pretty sure it did somehow. I couldn't specify how, but people have asked me before, you've done so many different things. Do you regret doing all of that other stuff before settling on writing? And I think it's the same answer for music. No, it all informs what you do. It's not wasted. It's like, the whole idea behind a liberal arts education, for example, is that you're a better person, or you're better at whatever you end up doing if you know something about, art history and music and even geometry, I guess, although not in my case. So it's, it all adds into what you end up doing. And I believe in a good way.
I agree with you. We've talked to many writers who have some remarkably checkered paths in order to get there. Ian Rankin is a real classic of that. He's the only writer I know who was once a swineherd. I always keep that one in the front of my mind because it's so funny.
He had a punk band too. He's a good singer. Yeah,
And music is really important to Ian as it is to Michael Connolly and quite a lot of writers that Patrick talks to.
yeah.
Is that true, Walter Mosley too, Patrick?
Yeah, Walter Mosley, definitely.
And Jim
Really,
Salas for sure. I mean,
James McBride. I met him in Austin a couple of years ago, and he came to the Texas Book Festival. He was plugging Good Lord Bird at the time, and he brought his band with him, and they
really,
performed. So yeah, a lot of writers have that other thing.
you bet.
sure.
Any other questions, Patrick?
Yeah, let's see. Okay, Michelle asks, has Jeff ever considered collaborating with someone on a book?
Well, I collaborated with my wife on several books, um, which may not be the answer to the question. Once or twice I've done I don't know what they're called. It was for charity, and everybody writes one chapter.
Right.
I don't know if that's really collaboration. I don't know if I could collaborate with anybody other than my wife. Um, I'm not totally closed to it, but I'm not sure how. I've done that in TV and movies, collaborated with people. Um, I'm not sure how it would work for me with a book, though.
Yeah. Let's see. Joe asks, any chance of Riley crossing paths with Billy Knight?
uh, I think they would be on opposite sides, so it would be difficult. I might have to kill one of them off. Um, I don't think so. I don't know if there will ever be another Billy Knight book either, which is a shame because I liked him too. He was almost, not even almost. He was much more self-consciously an offshoot from the Travis McGee school of writing, and it's Riley Wolf is definitely not, except for his philosophical asides, which Travis did so well.
Right.
And I doubt that they would ever really cross paths because I think I think Riley Wolf would have to go to Key West. And speaking personally and not casting any aspersions in any way, I am all done with Key West.
There you have it. Let's see. I don't think I have any other real questions here.
I could add, I think, Jeff, that there has been this past year in 2020, quite a few heist novels that have come our way and very good ones. I'm very fond of The Russian Pink, which came out in December. Um, Maybe it came out in November, but anyway, it was a book that we pushed in December. And Matthew Hart wrote a book called Diamond in 2005. That was a nonfiction book. And then The Russian Pink is a complicated political thriller heist, based on diamonds. And his knowledge of diamonds is so great that it was, almost like reading nonfiction in some parts. Then I can't remember. There was the earlier one that Jason Kaufman and I did, his author, and I'm going blank on the name, Patrick, but that was another one. So I'm wondering in part, if we're seeing a number of new things spring up. The Gothic is one. And then my totally least favorite, the Bad Seed novel, which is I think it's a dark offshoot of domestic suspense, but also the heist. And I wonder how much of this is a reaction to the last few years, that people are looking to um, do something different, to create more escapism, introduce more humor, maybe give us a hero that, can do the impossible. I'm not sure. There are probably a lot of factors in play.
Yeah, I don't have any idea. I'm not consciously in looking for trends or even aware of them usually. I kind of live, in my office, and I'm not plugged into anything in the business except what, my agent or my editor tells me. Um, I very deliberately live far away and far out of that. So as I said, I wasn't even aware that heist novels were a thing or serial killer novels were a thing. It's just, that's where I ended up. So if it's true, then it's because of, zeitgeist, or if you prefer, Weltschmerz.
I know, I think it is the zeitgeist thing, and it's fascinating. One of the questions that we are most frequently asked is, what's the next new thing? And I had a discussion on Friday, a very good one, I thought, about the Gothic novel and a resurgence of the Gothic and what a Gothic novel actually is. If you want to describe it. But if you're a bookseller, you can hardly avoid these questions, can you, Patrick?
That's right. Yeah. There seems to be something just kind of floating out there in the air that authors respond to. I'm not sure.
Right.
Michelle, I have another question for you, which actually I was going to ask you this as well. Who inspires you in the literary world? Who do you like to read?
Hmm. Although I guess those are different
Those are
questions.
two different questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that anyone has ever inspired me in the sense of, you know, what I write. A lot of writers, I love. Um, Patrick O'Brien is one. I can't get enough. I reread the whole Aubrey Maturin series a dozen times. Um, I got I got a real crush on P.G. Woodhouse. Um, there's a lot of writers that not. I don't read anything like what I write, and I tend to read historical fiction or fantasy. um, Naomi Novik, who
Mm.
is writing right now, she's current, is maybe the best fantasy writer of all time. She's just incredible. Um, and Miles Cameron is another one who writes fantastic fantasy. Um, so that's what I really like. And the historical stuff too, as I said, the Patrick O'Briens and a couple of others. So what I like and what inspires me. I never know what to say about inspire because I'm not sure what people mean by it. But no other writer has ever made me go, I'm gonna do that, except possibly, growing up in Florida on Travis McGee. I wanted to do something like that, sort of, adventure set in Florida. But that was done with the Billy Knight stuff.
Well, it's funny you were talking about humor and how tricky that can be. And P.G. Woodhouse, he had such a singular voice. Were you a Jeeves fan or
Yeah,
uh, yeah,
Jeeves and Birdie. And
right?
the real thing that I got from PG, other than, yeah, it's really funny, is the structure, the overall structure, but also the individual structure in scenes and in even jokes. You could see, or at least I could, that like he'd take one joke and work it through logically. How do I raise it to make it funnier? How do I change one thing at a time and build and go up and up and up? And that it's a real education. And I just loved his stuff. Again, that's something I've read a dozen times, several of the books.
I love Birdie and Jeeves, but my absolute favorite Woodhouse is The Coming of Golf, which is, because I come from a golfing family, but
Ah,
I've always thought The Coming of Golf was an absolute masterpiece.
I
So,
like the Blandings Castle ones.
yeah,
mhm.
those are
Yeah,
great too. You like the pig, right?
the pig. Yeah,
Pig
pigs
is
have
really good.
wings.
And the guy, I can't think of his name, Patrick Ben, whatever, has written a couple of sort of Woodhouse Carey,
Been shot.
I think that's his name, right? And they're not bad. I mean, they'll never be Woodhouse, but for people missing Woodhouse, they're kind of fun. So is that it for questions?
I think so. Yeah.
Great. Well, Jeff, we kept you for an hour. Thank you very much for spending time with
Well,
us.
always a pleasure. I'm glad to see you guys,
Well,
especially
we
since I
are
can't
too.
get out there.
December was a difficult month, I think, for many reasons to get together. But I'm really pleased that you were willing to start out 2021 with us. So
Well, it's
thank
it's
you.
as I said, a pleasure. I missed that great Mexican restaurant you took me to, not last time, but the time before that. So, um, I'm hoping someday we can all travel again, and that like there's a power grid and a structure to civilization and things like that, so that we can travel and be together again.
I hope so too. We really miss having you here in person. We really miss having your readers in the store and all that energy and excitement. And there are questions that we can't anticipate here and so forth, but meantime, we're lucky to have Zoom, I think, at all. It came
Yeah.
along just at the right time. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah,
So
me
thank you,
too.
Jeff, and thank you all
Thanks for having me,
watching
guys.
us tonight. And Patrick, thank you for your usual masterful job hosting. Bye.
Peace
Have
and
a
love.
good night, everybody. Yep.